Picture this. The year is 1901. You are walking down the Rue de la Visitation in the old French city of Poitiers. The spring air is heavy with the sweet perfume of lilacs and the faint, dusty scent of sun-warmed stone. You pass the imposing manor of the Monnier family, a dynasty of old wealth and unimpeachable honor. For decades, Madame Louise Monnier has been the very picture of aristocratic piety, a pillar of the community. Her charitable works as well known as the dark, shuttered windows of her grand home. Her son, Marcel, is a respected law school graduate, a man of distinction. The family is a local institution, their name a synonym for dignity. But a secret festers within those silent walls, a poison that has seeped into the very mortar of the house. An anonymous letter, its words trembling with urgency, has made its way to the Attorney General, speaking of a horror hidden in plain sight. Now, imagine you are with the police as they force their way into that respectable home. They ascend the grand staircase, drawn by a smell so putrid, so inhuman, it turns the stomach and chills the soul. They find a padlocked door. They break it open. The darkness inside is a physical thing, a suffocating blanket woven from years of neglect. As their eyes adjust, a scene from the deepest circle of hell reveals itself. Lying on a rotting straw mattress, amidst her own excrement and the putrefying remains of forgotten meals, is a creature. It is a woman, though she barely resembles one, a skeletal figure weighing less than 55 pounds. Her black hair a tangled, monstrous mane, her eyes, enormous in her emaciated face, blink slowly, unaccustomed to the light they have not seen in 25 years. This is the story of that woman, Blanche Monnier, a beautiful socialite who was condemned to a living death, not by a monster from a fairy tale, but by the one person who should have protected her, her own mother. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the depth of this darkness, we must first understand the light it extinguished. Long before the filth and the shadows, there was a world of gilded parlors, of silk gowns and whispered pleasantries. This was the world of the Monniers, a family of the haute bourgeoisie, in the French city of Poitiers during the latter half of the 19th century. Their name was a stone in the foundation of local society, their wealth old and their honor, it was believed, stainless. Their home at 21 Rue de la Visitation was not just a residence, it was a fortress of respectability, its dark, shuttered windows guarding the family's impeccable reputation from the prying eyes of the world. The family was ruled by a matriarch of formidable will, Madame Louise Monnier. In public, she was a portrait of piety and grace. She was a devout Catholic, a generous donor to charity, a woman whose name was synonymous with virtue. Her hands, always gloved in public, were known to distribute alms to the poor and support the church with unwavering devotion. Her son Marcel was the perfect heir to this legacy. A promising law school graduate, he was quiet, intelligent, and obedient, a man molded in the image of his family's ambition. But it was the family's jewel, the daughter, Blanche, upon whom the weight of their social aspirations truly rested. Blanche Monnier was, by all accounts, exceptionally beautiful. They called her ravishing, a creature of delicate features, with a cascade of dark, lustrous hair and eyes that held a spark of gentle fire. In her youth, she was the embodiment of the aristocratic ideal, charming, sociable, and graceful. She moved through the exclusive social circles of Poitiers like a character from a novel, attending balls, engaging in witty conversation at salons, and dreaming, as any young woman of her station would, of a future filled with love and purpose. She was an asset, a beautiful piece on the chessboard of high society, destined to be married into another family of equal or greater prestige. Her marriage was not simply her own affair. It was a strategic move for the entire Monnier dynasty. But beneath the polished veneer of the Monnier household, a different reality existed. Madame Monnier's public benevolence concealed a private tyranny. Her love was conditional, her approval a prize to be earned through absolute obedience. The home on Rue de la Visitation was not a place of warmth, but a gilded cage where every word was weighed and every action judged against the unforgiving standard of social propriety. Her obsession with reputation was absolute. She viewed the world as a hostile stage, upon which the family's honor was perpetually at risk. Any deviation, any hint of scandal, was not merely an embarrassment, but a mortal threat to the identity she had so carefully constructed. As Blanche blossomed into womanhood, this maternal grip tightened. The years began to pass. She turned 20, then 22, then 24. In the rigid society of 19th century France, a woman of her class who remained unmarried at 25 was stepping perilously close to the shadows of spinsterhood. The whispers would begin, the sideways glances, the pitying smiles. She was becoming an unsold treasure, a fading flower. The pressure from her mother, once a steady, guiding hand, now became a crushing, relentless force. Suitors were presented, men of good family and fortune, but for one reason or another, none resulted in a match. Perhaps Blanche found them dull. Perhaps her own romantic heart yearned for something more than a transaction. For Blanche, life was becoming a series of closed doors. Her friends married and started families, their lives moving forward while hers remained suspended in the opulent stillness of her mother's home. The vibrant, cheerful girl began to fade, replaced by a woman haunted by a quiet anxiety. She was trapped between her duty to her family and the desires of her own heart, a heart that was about to make a choice her mother would deem unforgivable. She was still beautiful, still the talk of Poitiers, but the light in her eyes was beginning to dim, shadowed by the looming certainty that her life was not her own. It belonged to her mother, to the family name, and to the cold, stone walls of the house on Rue de la Visitation, a house that was slowly, imperceptibly, transforming from a home into a prison. The world of Blanche Monnier, already shrinking, was about to collapse entirely. The agent of this collapse was not a grand scandal or a public disgrace, but something far more intimate and, in her mother's eyes, far more dangerous. It was love. At the age of 27, a time when her prospects were considered all but extinguished, Blanche met a man who saw past the gilded cage to the woman inside. He was not a duke or a baron. He was a lawyer, a man of modest means, living and working in Poitiers. More damningly, he was older than her, and a Protestant. In the rigidly Catholic, class-obsessed society of the Monniers, he was everything her mother was not looking for. He was, in a word, unsuitable. Their courtship was a secret, a fragile thing nurtured in the shadows of her suffocating life. Perhaps they met during a walk in the Jardin des Plantes, or through a brief, electrifying introduction at a public event. However it began, it grew into a desperate, clandestine affair. It was a romance conducted through whispered conversations, hurried glances, and letters passed through trusted intermediaries. For Blanche, this man represented an escape. He was not interested in the Monnier name or fortune. He was interested in her thoughts, her quiet wit, her gentle spirit. His love was a key, promising to unlock the door of her prison and lead her into a life of her own choosing. A life of simple, genuine affection, far from the cold calculus of her mother's social ambitions. The affair continued for some time, a secret wellspring of hope in Blanche's otherwise sterile existence. But secrets, like water, eventually find a way to the surface. Perhaps a servant overheard a whispered word, or a misplaced letter was discovered. Or perhaps Blanche, emboldened by love and weary of her gilded captivity, finally decided to confront her fate head-on. She made a declaration. It was not a plea for permission, but a statement of intent. She was going to marry the lawyer. She was choosing love over lineage, happiness over honor. We can only imagine the scene that followed. Picture the formal drawing room of the Monnier home, a room of heavy velvet curtains and polished mahogany, where the air itself seemed thick with unspoken rules. Blanche, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, stands before her mother. She speaks her truth, the words she has rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. The name of her beloved, a simple, respectable name, hangs in the air like a profanity. Madame Monnier's reaction was not one of explosive rage. It was far more terrifying. It was the chilling calm of absolute, unshakable conviction. Her face, usually a mask of serene piety, would have hardened into something grim. Her voice, when she finally spoke, would have been low and sharp, each word a carefully honed weapon. A Protestant, a man with no fortune to speak of, a lawyer who had failed to make a name for himself. It was an insult. It was a betrayal. It was an act of social suicide that she, the guardian of the Monnier legacy, could not and would not permit. She would have laid out the terms with icy precision. Blanche would end the affair immediately. She would renounce this man and never speak his name again. She would beg forgiveness for the shame she had brought upon their house and accept the life of quiet, obedient spinsterhood that was now her only respectable path. But Blanche, for the first time in her life, refused. The love she had found was too real, the promise of freedom too sweet. She stood her ground. She would not give him up. And in that moment of defiance, she sealed her fate. If she would not choose her family, then her family would be taken from her. If she would not live by her mother's rules within the walls of their home, then she would live within them as a prisoner. The decision was made with a terrifying resolve. Her brother, Marcel, the man of law and supposed reason, stood by and did nothing. His loyalty to his mother, or perhaps his fear of her, was stronger than any bond of sibling affection. There was no trial, no public judgment. There was only the quiet, methodical process of erasure. Blanche was taken from her sunlit bedroom, with its lace curtains and familiar comforts, and led up the grand staircase, past the family portraits that seemed to watch her with cold indifference. She was taken to a small, unused room in the attic. Perhaps she thought it was a temporary punishment, a cruel but short-lived attempt to break her will. She must have believed that reason would prevail, that her mother's love, however twisted, would eventually surface. But then came the sound, the creak of the heavy wooden door swinging shut, plunging the room into a dim, dusty twilight, the scrape of a heavy object dresser, perhaps being pushed against it from the outside, and finally, the definitive, metallic finality of a padlock clicking into place, the sound that would become the punctuation mark at the end of every day for the next 25 years. In that instant, Blanche Monnier, 25 years. How does a mind measure such a chasm of time in absolute darkness? It is 9,125 days. It is an ocean of blackness, where the passing of a day is marked only by a brief shift in temperature or the slide of a plate under the door. For Blanche Monnier, time did not march forward. It dissolved. It became a thick, stagnant pool of undifferentiated moments, each one identical to the last, each one a universe of silent suffering. In the beginning, there was defiance. The first days, perhaps even weeks, were filled with the echoes of the woman she had been. She would have beaten her fists against the unyielding wood of the door, her voice raw from screaming her mother's name, her brother's name, the name of her beloved. She would have pleaded, reasoned, and raged against the silence that was her only reply. From downstairs, they would have heard her. Madame Monnier, pouring tea in her parlor, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. Marcel, reading his law books, the principles of justice, turning to ash in his mouth. They heard her, and they did nothing. Her cries were simply an inconvenience, the final death rattle of a will they were determined to break. Her world shrank to the dimensions of the attic room. The only light was a phantom, a memory of the sun she yearned for. Her only companions were the spiders that spun their webs in the corners, and, soon, the rats. The rats, drawn by the smell of decay, became a terrifying, and then a mundane, feature of her existence. At first, she would have cowered from their chittering and the dry scrape of their claws on the floorboards, but in the crushing loneliness, even a monster can become a landmark. They were the only living things she would see, their dark, fleeting shapes the only movement in her static world. They were a sign of life, however repulsive, in a tomb that was pretending to be a room. The routine was a monstrous perversion of care. Once a day, the silence would be broken by the sound of footsteps approaching her door. There would be no knock, no word, just the metallic scrape of the padlock being opened and shut, and the soft slide of a plate across the floor. On it were the leftovers from the family's meals. Downstairs, scraps of bread, cold potatoes, bits of meat, whatever was destined for the bin. This was her sustenance. She ate in the dark, with her hands, surrounded by her own filth. The food was not nourishment. It was a tether, a thin, greasy cord that kept her anchored to a life of. In 1885, 9 years into her confinement, the man she had sacrificed everything for died. Her beloved lawyer passed away, never knowing the true, horrific reason for her sudden disappearance. Downstairs, her mother and brother would have learned of his death. The obstacle was gone. The reason for her imprisonment, the unsuitable marriage, was now an impossibility. Any rational person, any soul with a shred of humanity, would have seen this as the end. They could have opened the door. They could have concocted a story that she had been ill, that she had been away at a sanatorium and salvaged some semblance of a life for her. But they did not. The lock remained. This is the moment the story transforms from a tale of cruel discipline into one of pure pathological evil. Her confinement was no longer about preventing a marriage. It had become about the secret itself. To release Blanche now would be to release the truth. It would mean exposing their own monstrousness to the world, shattering the pristine image of the pious, charitable Monnier. Her continued suffering was the price of their reputation. And so, for another 16 years, she remained in the dark, her punishment continuing long after its supposed reason had turned to dust in a grave. Her mind, starved of stimulation, began to unravel. Memories of her past life would have replayed themselves with the vividness of hallucinations, only to fade into grotesque parodies. The face of her beloved would have blurred, his voice becoming just another ghost in the darkness. She would have lost the habit of speech, her vocal cords atrophying from disuse. Language, the tool of connection and society, became useless in her solitary universe. Her inner world, once filled with the hopes and dreams of a vibrant young woman, became a landscape of primal fear and confusion. Her body, too, became a testament to her ordeal. The beautiful, ravishing Blanche disappeared, consumed by the creature in the attic. Her muscles wasted away until she was too weak to stand. Her skin, untouched by water or sunlight, became covered in sores and filth. Her fingernails grew into long, claw-like talons. Her magnificent dark hair, once her crowning glory, became a single, solid, felted mass, caked. The end of Blanche Monnier's long night did not come with a gentle dawn, but with the violent splintering of a door. On May 23, 1901, acting on the anonymous tip, police forced their way into the attic. The first thing that struck them was the smell, a physical assault that sent seasoned officers reeling back into the hallway, gagging. Then came the light, the first real light to pierce that suffocating darkness in a quarter of a century. It fell upon a scene of unimaginable horror. On the putrid bed of straw lay the skeletal remains of a woman, blinking, her eyes like black holes in a parchment-white face. She was 52 years old, but looked ancient, a creature from a forgotten, subterranean world. Wrapped in a blanket, the officers carried her out of the house and into the blinding sunlight of a world that had forgotten her. The city of Poitiers, which had once admired her beauty, now stared in collective, horrified disbelief. The story erupted, a scandal so grotesque it seemed torn from the pages of a Gothic novel. The champions of charity, the pious Monniers, were revealed to be monsters. Madame Monnier and her son, Marcel, were immediately arrested. The fortress of their reputation, so carefully maintained for decades, crumbled into dust in a single afternoon. But justice, in this story, proved to be a frail and elusive thing. Madame Monnier, the architect of this living hell, would never face a human court. 15 days after her arrest, her heart, perhaps finally buckling under the weight of her exposed sin, gave out. She died in the infirmary of the prison, taking the blackest of her secrets with her. Her son, Marcel, did stand trial. He was convicted and sentenced to 15 months in prison, not for the torture he enabled, but for his role in his sister's illegal confinement. It was a shockingly light sentence, but it was something. Yet even this small measure of accountability was to be denied. Marcel appealed, and his conviction was overturned. The court ruled that he had no legal duty to rescue a chilling legal loophole that declared his passive complicity, his years of listening to his sisters suffering from the other side of a wall, to be no crime at all. He walked free. As for Blanche, her body was freed, but her mind remained a prisoner of the attic. She was taken to a psychiatric hospital in Paris, where she was bathed, fed, and cared for with a kindness she had not known for decades. The doctors and nurses noted her gentle, docile nature. She marveled at the simple things, the feeling of clean sheets, the taste of warm soup, the sight of the sky from a window. But the light had come too late. The delicate architecture of her mind had been shattered beyond repair. She never regained full lucidity and would spend the rest of her days in the quiet, sterile safety of the sanatorium. Blanche Monnier died in 1913. having spent the last 12 years of her life in physical freedom, but forever haunted by the ghosts of her 25 years in the dark. The story of Blanche Monnier is more than a simple horror story. It is a profound and disturbing testament to the darkness that can fester behind a facade of respectability. It reveals how the obsession with honor and reputation can become a cancer, a malignancy that devours love, compassion, and even basic humanity. The true horror is not just the act of a cruel mother, but the chilling silence of a compliant son and a neighborhood that, for years, must have ignored the strange smells and the unsettling stillness of the Monnier home. Her story is a ghost story made of flesh and blood, a haunting reminder that the most terrifying prisons are not all